Welcome back to another FPL video ahead of Game Week 13. We've got just about 2 weeks until the next deadline. We've got the international break, which a lot of people love so much, but we're going to talk about 10 players to buy, hold, sell, and skip. And if there are a lot of updates and injuries that happen over the next week, there could be an updated version of this video. There's also going to be the team selection and the best wildcard team alongside all the usual FPL and UCL fantasy content heading into the next match days and game week. So if you end up enjoying this video, smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Our aim is to get this video to the 200 likes, and we're going to keep on pushing towards 22,000 subscribers and beyond. But without further ado, let's jump straight into this video. I covered Cole Palmer a few weeks ago and he was a skip back then, and now I'm saying he's a buy, but I really want to highlight him because he's the second most transferred in player this week so far, of course, with over 170,000 managers bringing him in, and I think it's worth highlighting him because he's a popular option for a reason, and we need to really distinguish the best time to buy him and also the pros and cons behind Cole Palmer. So at 5.2 million and below, you're not going to get better than a penalty taker for Chelsea who also has decent assist potential. His ownership is 7.3%. It was around 2% the last time I covered him a few weeks ago. He's got 4 goals, 3 assists, an XGI figure of 6.54 and 47 FPL points. Great long-term fixtures, but all 4 of his goals have come from penalties. This is not sustainable. We need to see him score from open play to really cement Palmer as one of the best midfielders in the game. But in terms of budget options, I think he's right up there with Gordon, Hwang Hee-chan, Adingra, and I would argue that Palmer is better than Adingra, despite the fact that up until Game Week 16, the fixtures are better for Brighton, but longer term, I would rather have Cole Palmer, and you can even buy him now against an injury-depleted Newcastle side in Game Week 13, but I would argue that Game Week 14 against Brighton is the best time to buy Palmer if you want him a bit earlier than the green fixtures from 16 onwards, like Everton away and Sheffield United at home. So for me, Cole Palmer is a buy, but is he a priority? Probably not, unless you're really looking for that budget midfielder. And honestly, I want to see a bit more from open play first, especially in terms of goals. The creativity is certainly there, but I still think he needs to add a few more goals there from open play to really cement Palmer as one of the very best. I bought Saliba in my Game Week 12 team and he scored straight after Arsenal conceded, so that was one of the shining lights of my season so far, which hasn't been a great one, of course. He is priced at 5.4 million. He went up in price the other day. His ownership is just around 30%. He's got 1 goal, 1 assist, 5 bonus points and 55 FPL points overall. The fixtures don't look great over the next 5, a lot of grey fixtures there, but still, long-term Arsenal have great fixtures overall, and defensively, they've got the best games of any team up until Christmas. So I think Saliba is the very best Arsenal defender to cover, period. You've also got Gabriel, Zinchenko, Ben White, but I would argue Saliba is nailed. He's got bonus points potential. He can get the odd goal or assist, and he hasn't been benched so far this season in the Premier League, but Gabriel has on 4 occasions. Ben White missed out through injury. Then you've got Zinchenko competing with Tomiyasu as the left back, and while Zinchenko has a high ceiling, I don't think he's the safest FPL option. So for me, if you want to cover Arsenal defensively, it's Saliba, then probably Raya, and then in third place I would put Gabriel as the best ways to cover the Gunners defensively. And Saliba is one of the best defenders in world football. He's only 22 years of age. His ceiling is absolutely insane. He could be one of the very best centre-backs in the world at some point. But for me, Saliba is a great purchase, and I would buy him right now, even if you already have David Raya or Gabriel. Mbeumo has some terrific stats, not just in terms of goal output, but the underlying numbers do suggest that he's capable of even more. The long-term fixtures, I keep on referring to long-term fixtures, of course, because it's not just about the next 3, 4 or 5, but also just going beyond to the next 10 and possibly until Christmas at this stage. Mbeumo, I think, fits the bill. He's 6.8 million, his ownership is 22%, 6 goals, 3 assists, and his XGI is 10.72. That is absolutely unbelievable for a midfielder who isn't even priced at 7 million. He's got 74 FPL points. He blanked against Liverpool. He really should have scored in that game. And in the previous games, he showed what he could do with some massive returns there against the likes of Chelsea. He's got Arsenal at home next, so you could argue that he's not a buy this week, but ultimately, you can buy him a bit early, maybe sell Diaby to Mbeumo now, or you could delay that move for Game Week 14 or 15 when Mbeumo plays Luton at home and Brighton away. I would argue that Brighton is a good fixture for the likes of Mbeumo on the counter-attack, and Brighton haven't kept a clean sheet this season in the Premier League, and only 1 or 2, I think it was, in all competitions, which includes the Europa League. But those games are absolutely fantastic for Mbeumo. He's fixture proof. I wouldn't be surprised if he hauled against Arsenal either. He's on penalties. There's so much to like. And as opposed to Palmer, who still needs to prove himself a little bit more from open play, Mbeumo has already done so from last season when Ivan Toney was first suspended. And not only that, Mbeumo has penalties to add to his arsenal. So for me, Mbeumo is a buy. He's one of the best long-term midfielders, and he can still haul against the very best teams. I'm seeing a lot of people saying I'm going to sell Son this week, and especially those that don't have Salah. I can understand that, but even if you're trying to get Salah, I wouldn't do that this week. I would hold for at least one more until Gameweek 14, because Son has a good record against Aston Villa, and to be fair, he also has a good record against Manchester City, but I think from Gameweek 14 onwards, you could class Heung-min Son as a sell, but right now against Aston Villa, that high line, I could see a high-scoring thriller in that match, and I would hold Heung-min Son. He's actually one of the very best captaincy options this week, in my opinion. He's priced at 9.7 million. He went up in price the other day. His ownership is over 40%, 8 goals, 1 assist, an XGI figure of 6.67. So as usual, there is a degree of overperformance in Heung-min Son because he's a good finisher, and he's got 82 FPL points. He's right up there with the likes of Salah and Haaland, who have built a bit of a gap in the last 2 games, but Son is still not too far behind. I would keep him for Aston Villa. It's purely a fixtures thing, and then against Manchester City, you could sell him, but to be honest, if you're not going to go to Saka or Salah, I don't really see too many midfielders that you should sell Son to unless you're going to go to maybe Jarrod Bowen, and that also in turn gives you enough funds to go for Erling Haaland up front or something ridiculous like that. So I don't think there's many midfielders that are better than Heung-min Son even now with no James Maddison, and I think that omission and absence until January will limit Son's ceiling, and as a result he is more dispensable as he was a few weeks ago. He's still playing down the middle, Spurs are still going to score goals, and I still think Heung-min Son will be on the score sheet plenty of times, but Son would be a long-term sell, and right now I would definitely hold for Aston Villa. A lot of people watching will have a triple up in Aston Villa just like myself, and it's all a question of prioritising. I think Ollie Watkins and Diaby are holds for the next 2 game weeks, but long term you can start trimming them down, and you could sell Diaby in Game Week 15 against Manchester City. But with Diaby facing an injury-depleted Spurs side, and then it's Bournemouth away, I think he could be worth holding on to for the next 2 game weeks. He's 6.8 million. He's done very well in the last couple of weeks, where I also discussed holding him before the Luton Town game, where he produced a massive return, and I was very happy for that myself, as Diaby is in my team. His XGI is now pretty decent at 5.02, 3 goals, 6 assists, 65 FPL points, very impressive numbers. Whilst Diaby might not be on the same level as Mbeumo long-term, I still think Diaby is a good FPL asset, and even in the tougher games like Man City, Arsenal and Brentford, he could do something, and Aston Villa are a formidable force in home matches. That's 13 consecutive home victories at Villa Park, but they are very suspect away from home, which could also play into the argument of selling him now, facing Tottenham and Bournemouth both away. But with the injuries to Tottenham, they could play Eric Dyer at the back. There's no Mickey van der Ven, Maddison and many other key assets. Romero is still out. Udogie is possibly injured, despite him obviously coming back from the suspension. There's a lot of problems there at Tottenham Hotspur all of a sudden, and I think Diaby could really take advantage, and I think Aston Villa could fancy their chances. So whilst I wouldn't back Aston Villa's chances of a clean sheet in the next 2 game weeks, or to be honest over the next 5, I think they can score plenty of goals, and Diaby could certainly be involved. Julian Alvarez has been disappointing in the last couple of weeks, but he got an assist against Chelsea, and for me, he is a hold. He did really well against Liverpool last season at the Etihad when Erling Haaland was missing out and Alvarez was playing down the middle. Manchester City had one of their best games in terms of performances. They went 1-0 down, then played some amazing football to win the game 4-1, and Alvarez is priced at 7.1 million. His ownership is still quite high at over 32%. 4 goals, 6 assists, 27 key passes, I think, is the key stat to highlight, and 66 FPL points, but only 4 big chances, 2 big chances created. His underlying numbers aren't particularly great. He's not on the same level as Ollie Watkins in FPL at this moment in time, but the long-term fixtures for Manchester City are fantastic, especially from Game Week 16 onwards, and even against Liverpool, Tottenham and Aston Villa, Alvarez can do extremely well, and you might be a bit apprehensive about going for Alvarez and Haaland as your 2 strikers, but I still think that's viable, especially when the fixtures turn really well for Manchester City in a couple of weeks' time, and I still like Alvarez against the likes of Liverpool at home. So for me, despite some poor underlying numbers, not the best of form as well for the Argentine, I would definitely hold on to Julian Alvarez. I highlighted Matty Cash last week and he was a hold back then, and you can still do the same thing. Sell him in Gameweek 15, but keep for the next two. But if you have a trip up in Aston Villa, let's say Diaby, Watkins and Cash, and you want to sell one of them, my advice would be to sell Cash first over Diaby and Watkins, because I don't see clean sheets for Aston Villa. Maybe one maximum over the next 5 game weeks. They have a poor away record and their attack is still very good on their travels, and in general, they're going to score goals. But I just don't trust them to keep clean sheets, and Matty Cash needs to really deliver in terms of goals or assists in order to justify his inclusion in your side. But the question is, who do you sell Cash to? A Crystal Palace defender will be just fine, just like Anderson, Mitchell or Gay. Maybe someone like Saliba, as covered earlier in the video, or another Arsenal defender. You've also got Lascelles or Trippier to cover Newcastle. Maybe Mikalenko or Maguire as a cheap option. Not to mention there's a few other defenders like Tsimikas, who I'll discuss later in this video as well. But Matty Cash for me is a sell if you had to pick one Aston Villa asset to sell right now and just to get rid of completely. It wouldn't surprise me if he hauled against Tottenham or Bournemouth. He's got a goal in him, and it's just a question of when is he going to deliver that mega haul that he's capable of. But he hasn't done it since the Burnley game. Ever since, it's the odd clean sheet here and there, but it hasn't happened enough really to justify his price tag. And Cash has some really good underlying numbers. His XG is 3.43. That's incredible for a defender, but only 2 goals and 1 assist. And I say only because I think he's capable of much more. 45 FPL points. He's a quite template pick at around 34% ownership, but that will only continue to go down as the weeks go by. So for me, long-term, Matty Cash is definitely a sell. You could maybe delay this move until Gameweek 15, but the end result will be the exact same. Ever since his hat-trick against Sheffield United a couple of weeks ago, I discussed skipping Eddie Nketiah, and the following week it was Jackson after his hat-trick against Tottenham Hotspur. And if we look back to a couple of weeks ago, what's happened in that time frame? Well, Eddie Nketiah did nothing against West Ham. He was anonymous against Newcastle. Then he got injured during midweek against Sevilla. He wasn't in the matchday squad. And then he was pictured in training a couple of days ago. And then there was this big debate, would Nketiah start? And he didn't against Burnley. And he came on for a 1-pointer. So he has been very frustrating for those that bought him after the hat-trick. And as I said back then, Nketiah can do really well in a one-off game, so he's perfect sometimes for a free hit facing a Burnley at home or a Sheffield United, but you can't really trust him in a prolonged period of time to start consistently and deliver on a consistent basis. And with Gabriel Jesus returning from an injury very soon, it could be after the international break. He's been called up to Brazil. You've got Trossard scoring goals, assisting, and most importantly, making Arsenal play better and linking up very well with Martinelli and Saka. I just don't see a spot for Eddie Nketiah in your FPL teams. He's owned by over 10% of the game, and I just don't think he's worth it, to be quite honest with you. He's got 5 goals, 2 assists, an XG of 3.14, 50 FPL points, and some decent underlying numbers like 25 shots overall, 22 in the box, and 6 big chances, 6 key passes even. He can win penalties, but I just don't trust Eddie Nketiah long term. I think Jesus and Trossard make Arsenal play better, and despite some really good long-term fixtures, if you want to go for an Arsenal attacker, I think it's Saka, maybe a Martinelli, or nothing else at all. Tsimikas is a good option to buy on the wild card, and I think he's a good purchase long term, so don't get me wrong, he is not a definitive skip, but he's been transferred in by over 70,000 managers so far this week. He's the 6th most transferred in player, and guess what? He faces Manchester City away next, where Liverpool conceded 4 times the last time they went to the Etihad, and Manchester City are still a formidable force. So don't buy Tsimikas and start him expecting a return against Manchester City. If you are buying him and you want to maybe not burn a transfer, fair enough, but ultimately bench Tsimikas in Gameweek 13 and start him against Fulham, Sheffield United and Crystal Palace. In those home games, Tsimikas and Liverpool defenders have a good chance of a clean sheet, and on the odd occasion, like we saw in Gameweek 12, you can get attacking returns from Tsimikas. He did extremely well there and rewarded his owners and those that stayed patient with the Greek left back. I personally benched him, but we'll talk more about that in the team selection video. He's owned by 11.2% of the game, 4.6 million price tag, 0 goals, 2 assists, which both came against Brentford, and he's got an XGI of 0.81. So I think the return was maybe a bit inflated, a bit fortunate, but it is what it is. And Tsimikas is a good option overall, especially at that price tag. He's got 29 FPL points, and his main competition is from Joe Gomez at left back. And because he missed out completely at the weekend that allowed Tsimikas to play the full 90. Otherwise, a half-time substitution could have been on the cards, as we saw against Toulouse in the Europa League, where Tsimikas had an absolute stinker. But long-term, Tsimikas is a buy. He's a good player to have, but don't buy him for Manchester City and start him expecting some points. That would be my advice. That's all I'm saying. Don't just look at a player who got 15 points last week. Buy him, start him, and expect something against the European champions and one of the very best teams in world football. But long-term, don't get me wrong, Tsimikas is a good player to buy and a very good option on the wildcard. The final player covered in this video is Soufal. He's also a skip, especially for those that have Areola already. Are you really going to double up on West Ham defensively in certain weeks? Is there a need for Soufal? I personally don't think so. The fixtures look fantastic, but I would rather go for Kudus and Bowen, even as a double up, compared to having Soufal and maybe a double up in West Ham defensively. Only one clean sheet this season. Yes, Soufal has some decent attacking threat, and if you don't have Areola, Soufal could be a decent 4th or 5th defender. But apart from the assists, I just don't really see too many avenues for points there for Vladimir Soufal. 4 bonus points, pretty decent, but of course, it's mainly down to the assists. An expected assist figure of 1.04, so there is some overperformance there. And he's got 36 FPL points. Not too bad. 3.5% ownership. We're always looking for these differentials to just set us aside from the rest of the pack and to find those ways to claw back those points and ranks. But ultimately, for me, Soufal is a skip, and the best way to cover West Ham defensively is through Areola. So that's it. We've covered 10 players to buy, hold, sell and skip. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Do you agree or disagree with any of the selections? And are there any other players that you want covered? Maybe Mikalenko, who I will discuss very soon in some future videos. But thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Our aim is to get this video to over 200 likes and to keep on pushing towards 22,000 subscribers and beyond. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below for the Patreon, Championships Discord server, and the FPL League. There's also a link to Draft Hand, which I highly encourage you to check out as well. I wish you all the best of luck for Gameweek 13, and if you can, enjoy the international break, and I'll see you next time.